Tonight, America's top diplomat delivering some harsh words to our most critical ally in the Middle East and setting up a diplomatic showdown of historic proportions. Less than 4 weeks until the current administration heads for the exits. Welcome to the Kelly File. I'm Sandra Smith in for Megyn Kelly. The phrase war of words probably doesn't do it justice, as Secretary of State John Kerry today launched into a blistering speech following the recent UN vote on Israel settlements. But Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu was not taking the comments lying down, launching into his own pointed rebuke a little over an hour after Mr. Kerry wrapped his speech. And with both men using phrases like hard truce and lip service, observers note tensions that long simmered beneath the surface are now boiling over in the public forum. Watch.
Friends need to tell each other the hard truths, and friendships require mutual respect. They fail to recognize that this friend, the United States of America, that has done more to support Israel than any other country.
In a speech ostensibly about peace between Israelis and Palestinians, Secretary Kerry paid lip service to the unremitting campaign of terrorism that has been waged by the Palestinians against the Jewish state for nearly a century.
There are a similar number of Jews and Palestinians living between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean Sea. They have a choice. They can choose to live together in one state, or they can separate into two states. But here is a fundamental reality. If the choice is one state, Israel can either be Jewish or democratic. It cannot be both.
What he did was to spend most of his speech blaming Israel for the lack of peace by passionately condemning a policy of enabling Jews to live in their historic homeland and in their eternal capital, Jerusalem.
The Israeli Prime Minister publicly supports a two-state solution, but his current coalition is the most right-wing in Israeli history, with an agenda driven by the most extreme elements.
I don't seek applause. I seek the security and peace and prosperity and the future of the Jewish state. Israelis do not need to be lectured about the importance of peace by foreign leaders.
Ultimately, it will be up to the Israeli people to decide whether the unusually heated attacks that Israeli officials have directed towards this administration best serve Israel's national interests and its relationship with an ally that has been steadfast in its support.
Palestinian rejection of Israel and support for terror are what the nations of the world should focus on if they truly want to advance peace. And I can only express my regret and say that it's a shame that Secretary Kerry does not see this simple truth.
Ron Dermer, the Israeli ambassador to the U.S., joins us in moments. And later, famed Harvard Law professor Alan Dershowitz weighs in on the idea that the administration set this whole UN vote up. But first, we go to John Huddy in Jerusalem with more on the fallout.
Sandra, tonight's speech is perhaps the climax of several days of fierce political battle and fiery political rhetoric over Friday's UN resolution vote. And there's been no love lost between Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and Secretary of State John Kerry. Now, along with Prime Minister Netanyahu, other Israeli leaders are also firing back against Secretary of State Kerry. One Israeli official told me that while the Middle East burns, Secretary of State Kerry talks about home construction. And another senior Israeli official said that he questions if the Obama administration truly understands what's happening on the ground here. Well, Palestinian leaders are also sounding off about the speech and the future of peace talks. Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas said that Palestinian leadership is ready to resume talks if Israel is willing to freeze all settlement activities in the West West Bank, including those in East Jerusalem as well. The Palestinians also say they want the negotiations to be based on Friday's resolution, and that alone may be a non-starter for Israeli leaders. That said, a Palestinian delegation plans to attend a Middle East peace conference next month in Paris aimed at restarting talks between the Israelis and Palestinians, a conference that Israeli officials, one senior official told me, is a sham just to hurt Israel's credibility, and that Israel will not be attending. Sandra.
John Huddy, thank you. Joining me now to react, Ron Dermer, the Israeli ambassador to the United States. Ambassador, thank you for being here tonight.
Good to be with you, Sandra.
We're hearing from you, one of the first reactions from you to the Secretary of State's speech today. It was a long speech. He was clearly showing his frustrations. We've heard Benjamin Netanyahu respond. John Kerry lashing out at the so-called settler agenda. Your response?
Well, look, first of all, this is not new. I've been in this capacity as ambassador for over 3 years. Before that, I was the senior advisor to the Prime Minister. And so we've been working with this administration for the last 8 years. And in 2009, we had a crisis over the whole question of settlements. So this has nothing to do with this or that Israeli coalition or what has happened over the last 8 years, or even Netanyahu himself. This administration, President Barack Obama, came into office thinking that the whole reason why we don't have peace with the Palestinians is because of the question of settlements. I remember we had just finished this war in Gaza, where we had thousands of rockets that landed on our heads, and that was a few years after we had withdrawn from Gaza and uprooted, not frozen, uprooted 21 settlements. And all of a sudden, in the early days of the administration, as the Prime Minister came to Washington, this became the be-all and end-all. You have to do something on the issue of the settlements. And guess what the Prime Minister did? He did a freeze. And what happened? The Palestinians stayed out of negotiations. So this is not a new story. This is not the building up of all sorts of years and some new policy. It was deeply disappointing that this administration, in its waning days, laid the blame for the failure to achieve peace at Israel. Just one other point. This was a 72-minute speech, and yet they did not discuss that Israel made a sweeping peace offer in 2000 that was met by a Palestinian rejection and a wave of terrorism that claimed 1,000 Israeli lives. They did not mention that in 2008, another Israeli prime minister made a sweeping peace offer that was also rejected by the Palestinians. The reason why we don't have peace is because the Palestinians have rejected the state of the Jewish people in any boundary. And until we deal with the root of the conflict, we're never going to be able to advance peace. And I hope this is the closing chapter of the wrong approach to peace, and that soon we will open a new chapter where we can finally take the right road to peace, because we in Israel want it more than anyone, even the American Secretary of State.
When you talk about that new chapter, clearly you are already developing and have developed a relationship with the incoming Trump administration. What does the Israeli-United States relationship look like under the Trump administration?
Well, first of all, I don't think that this is a battle between Israel and the United States. We were very heartened that President-elect Trump was against this move at the UN Security Council, that he wants to work closely with Israel moving forward to strengthen this alliance. And we were also heartened by the fact that leading senators from both parties, Republicans and Democrats alike, opposed this resolution. So I don't think this is an issue that we have with the United States of America, our most important ally in the world, that we share values and interests and a common destiny. We're fighting the same enemies, and we have the same goals. And I believe with the new administration, with bipartisan support in Congress, we will work to advance peace and security. I do not think there'll be daylight between the U.S. and Israel, and we look forward to having that conversation and seeing what we can do to reverse this resolution, mitigate its dangers, and get about the business of actually advancing peace, which hasn't happened for the last 8 years. Not because of Israel, because we haven't had a Palestinian leadership that wants to make peace, and unfortunately, a U.S. administration that has blamed the wrong party for the failure to advance peace.
And I want to get to Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's reaction to the speech, because he really ripped into it, saying, quote, it was skewed against Israel. He said it obsessively dealt with settlements, barely touched upon the root of the conflict, which he described as Palestinian opposition to a Jewish state in any boundaries. And we actually had our brain room dig into this speech, Ambassador, finding that Iran was mentioned once, Hezbollah was mentioned once, Hamas was mentioned 4 times, terrorism 7 times, occupation 13 times, settlements 26 times, to the point of your prime minister.
Well, obviously, that was just a continuation of the policy for many years and this obsessive focus on the settlements. I'll tell you one thing that bothered me more than anything else of the speech. I heard the Secretary of State go after this coalition as being the most right-wing coalition in Israel's history, and this is the reason why we don't have peace. There is another coalition, and it's a coalition of the Palestinian Authority with Hamas, which is a terror organization that is openly committed to Israel's destruction and whose charter calls for the murder of Jews worldwide. You would think in a 72-minute speech, the Secretary of State might have mentioned that as being one of the reasons why we don't have peace. Or the fact that you have a Palestinian Authority that glorifies violence and terrorism. He touched on that with a couple of sentences in 72 minutes, but that raises children from a very young age to hate Israel, to hate Jews, glorifies mass murderers, names public squares after them. This is the reason why we don't have peace. The refusal to recognize the right of the Jewish people to have a state in our ancestral homeland, and the failure to educate the new generation for peace.
I want to get to a couple more reactions here because U.S. Senator Chuck Schumer, a leading Democrat in this country, has responded just recently, a few moments ago, putting out, while Secretary Kerry mentioned Gaza in his speech, he seems to have forgotten the history of the settlements in Gaza, where the Israeli government forced settlers to withdraw from all settlements, and the Palestinians responded by sending rockets from Gaza into Israel. While he may not have intended it, I fear Secretary Kerry, in his speech and action at the UN, has emboldened extremists on both sides. Ambassador.
Well, listen, the extremists on the Palestinian side are terrorists, and they're in the government. When we have any act of terror in Israel, all our political, religious leaders, national leaders, we condemn it. We turn those terrorists into pariahs. We don't name public squares after mass murderers. So I wouldn't draw any moral equivalence, but I want to thank Senator Schumer. I want to thank him for his strong stance in coming out against this, in basically calling on President Obama to veto this resolution. And he's exactly right in terms of what happened in Gaza. We did exactly what the world says that we should do now. We withdrew to the 67 borders. We didn't freeze settlements. We uprooted all of those settlements, and we were hoping to achieve peace, and instead we got thousands of rockets on our cities. Now that is just not some chapter in a book that takes place in some foreign country. This is the reality that Israelis live day after day. We are responsible for the consequences of decisions that are made elsewhere. And that shouldn't be the case.
And
As the Prime Minister, just one last point I can have. The Prime Minister said it today, and it's important, because it's, I think, one thing that most infuriates the Israeli people. We are a sovereign nation. We have to make the tough choices that affect our own security and our own lives. We want peace more than anyone else in the world because it's our children who go into battle to defend our country. And we would like to see that day come when we can live in peace with all our neighbors. So it's not going to happen from a speech in Washington. It's not going to happen from a vote in New York. It's not going to happen between a conference in Paris. Let the Israeli people decide their own future. We are a sovereign nation. Respect the democratic will of the Israeli voters to make the choices necessary for our future and our children's future. We're the ones who have the most skin in the game. We're the ones who most want peace.
That being said, Ambassador, you as well as the Prime Minister have charged the Obama administration with being behind the push for this resolution. By the way, do you still support that idea?
Absolutely.
And right now, a top Obama aide is suggesting that you are putting that out there and that the Prime Minister is putting that out there as merely a distraction. That's the Deputy National Security Advisor, Ben Rhodes, is now saying that. If you have the evidence, which we are told you have ironclad evidence, why not turn it over right now? Reveal this to your people. Reveal this to the American people.
Well, I'm not the master of fiction. Ben Rhodes is. I can tell you we will present that evidence to the new administration through the appropriate channels. It's sensitive information. I think a new administration will take a look at it. And there's just no question about it. When a Prime Minister of Israel goes on international television and says he has clear evidence, believe me, he's got clear evidence. I've never even heard him make such a claim. I know 100% that the Prime Minister is right. We will give it to the new administration, and they can decide whether or not they want to show it or choose to share it with the American people.
Ambassador Dermer, thank you for coming on tonight.
Thank you.
Breaking tonight, we received word a short time ago that Oscar-nominated actress Debbie Reynolds has died at the age of 84. Tragically, her death comes just one day after her daughter, Carrie Fisher, passed away after suffering from heart failure at the age of 60. Reynolds was a legendary entertainer best known for her role in Singing in the Rain, was rushed to the hospital earlier today after suffering a medical emergency. She's also known for the 1964's The Unsinkable Molly Brown, for which she received an Oscar nomination. TMZ reporting Debbie Reynolds' final words as "I want to be with Carrie." Coming up, more on what the final weeks of the Obama administration could have in store for Israel. With Prime Minister Netanyahu now slamming an apparent about-face from the White House as he accuses them of secretly engineering the terms of what's now being called an anti-Israel resolution. Famed Harvard law professor Alan Dershowitz says Obama's actions are akin to stabbing Israel in the back. He joins after the break. Plus, are the Obama administration's actions just pushing Israel closer to President-elect Trump? That debate ahead.
Very, very strong.
Breaking tonight, new information coming to light on the Obama administration's alleged backing of last week's UN condemnation of Israeli settlements. Those reports now raising questions over a meeting Secretary Kerry had scheduled weeks ago with Palestinian diplomat Saeb Erekat. Just moments ago, you heard Israeli ambassador to the U.S., Ron Dermer, vowing to reveal their evidence to the incoming Trump administration, calling the proof of Kerry's collusion ironclad, a point Prime Minister Netanyahu seconded today. Watch.
We have it on absolutely incontestable evidence that the United States organized, advanced, and brought this resolution to the United Nations Security Council. We'll share that information with the incoming administration. Some of it is sensitive. It's all true. You saw some of it in the protocol released in an Egyptian paper. There's plenty more. It's the tip of the iceberg.
With more on how this story continues to develop, we go to Trace Gallagher from our LA newsroom. Hey, Trace.
Hey, Sandra, the White House says it abstained from the UN resolution condemning Israeli settlements because it undermines the peace process. But the administration vehemently denies reports in both Egyptian and Israeli media claiming Secretary of State John Kerry discussed the UN resolution during a meeting with top Palestinian officials, including Palestinian Secretary General Saeb Erekat. A U.S. National Security Council spokesman called the report a fabrication, saying the meeting never occurred. Though even the State Department website says that Kerry and Erekat were set to meet on December 12th, which is around the time of the report. And now that Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu has upped the ante, saying he has ironclad proof the U.S. was behind the resolution, the White House appears to be adjusting its denial, saying it did not draft or introduce the resolution. But today, Secretary Kerry appeared to indicate the U.S. was involved in negotiations about the resolution. Watch.
We made clear to others, including those on the Security Council, that it was possible that if the resolution were to be balanced and it were to include references to incitement and to terrorism, that it was possible the United States would then not block it.
After Kerry's speech, Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas released a statement that reads in part, quoting, "The minute the Israeli government agrees to cease all settlement activities, the Palestinian leadership stands ready to resume permanent status negotiations." Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu called Kerry's speech unbalanced. And through all of this back and forth, President-elect Trump is gaining Israeli support. Today, Trump tweeted, quote, "Stay strong, Israel. January 20th is fast approaching." In return, Netanyahu wrote, "President-elect Trump, thank you for your warm friendship and your clear-cut support for Israel." You'll recall throughout the GOP primary, Donald Trump was heavily criticized by his opponents as being anti-Israel. Sandra.
All right, Trace, thank you. Joining me now with more, Harvard law professor Alan Dershowitz. Alan, good to see you. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
What can you tell us? I mean, do you believe that there was collusion here?
Well, I think it's obvious. First of all, if the United States did not have any role in helping this go through, it would show that we've abdicated responsibility.
Well, the White House
of
is
course,
denying
we
that they
had
were
some role,
involved.
but of course they had a role, and there will be congressional hearings. And Ben Rhodes will have to raise his hand and swear under oath. And when he is cross-examined, he is going to acknowledge exactly what role he played, what role Vice President Biden played, what role the President of the United States played. This could not have happened without the complete support and encouragement of the United States. And this sets back the peace process enormously. Secretary Kerry, who I know well and who means well, has now discouraged the Palestinians from coming forward and negotiating, because what basically he said to them is, it's not your fault, it's the Israelis' fault. And now the Palestinians have said they have a clever answer. Oh, we'll sit down and negotiate, but only under the Security Council resolution, which means they start the negotiation with the Western Wall in their possession, the access road to Hebrew University and Hadassah Hospital. It becomes an unfair bargaining position, and the end result is peace is going to be set back years as the result of this ill-begotten resolution and this very bad speech
But
today
Prime
by
Minister
Kerry.
Netanyahu seems to already have developed a relationship with the incoming President Donald Trump. Are you saying, from your perspective, that so much damage has been done that there's not much that Donald Trump can do come January 20th? Because he is promising a lot.
Well, President Obama deliberately and undemocratically tied the hands of his successor by having a resolution of the Security Council that cannot now be undone because of the veto power. And it is so undemocratic for a lame duck president, when Congress is not in session, to take out his anger and pique at another country by tying the hands of the incoming president. It's going to make peace much, much more difficult to achieve. And this speech today, the idea that Secretary Kerry would talk about Israel not wanting to make peace, not mentioning that it offered a two-state solution in 1937, 1948, 1967, 2000, 2005, 2008, every time the Palestinians have rejected it. You wouldn't know that with John Kerry's rewriting of history. This speech should win an Academy Award for Best Fictional Presentation.
Wow. And you've already gone on the record calling it meaningless and a tragic missed opportunity.
It's much worse than that. It's dangerous because it tells the Palestinians, you don't have to negotiate. You don't have to make painful compromises. We'll give you a state in Paris. We'll give you a state at the UN. You don't have to negotiate with the Israelis. Now they've said they will negotiate with the Israelis, but the Israelis have offered them open-ended negotiation for the last several years. They've never taken them up on
With
it.
just a few weeks to go now with the Obama administration, rewind 4 years ago. You sat down, you said President Obama invited you
That's right.
to meet with him before Inauguration Day.
That's right.
What was that meeting all about?
Well, he called me into the Oval Office for a half an hour. He sat down and he assured me that he would always have Israel's back, that he would never abandon Israel. He obviously wanted my support, wanted me to express my support to voters,
But
which I
ultimately, what was
did.
his plan?
His plan was, who knows whether he was deceiving me at the time or whether he changed his mind. I don't know what basis he would have for
Okay.
changing his mind,
And what's
but
the-
I can tell you he deceived me.
What's the future of the United Nations? The ambassador has been calling it a cesspool of anti-Israel actions. What should happen there?
Well, first of all, the United States should defund the United Nations, any effort to try to implement this proposal. And it works. Let me tell you what the Saudis did a couple of years ago. The United Nations said they were going to put on a blacklist of how they treat child soldiers. And the Saudis went to Ban Ki-moon and said, unless you take us off the blacklist, we're going to stop funding the UN. And Ban Ki-moon said, all right, we'll take you off the blacklist. So the United States has to use its economic leverage now to turn the United Nations into a fair forum. Today, if Algeria introduced a resolution that the earth was flat and that Israel flattened it, it would win 164 to 22 with 13 abstentions. There are automatic votes against Israel on every issue. Israel is condemned more than all the other countries in the world combined. Syria is murdering people. The Russians are taking over the Ukraine, and all the UN cares about is condemning Israel for settlements. And settlements are not the barrier to peace. You can build a contiguous state, as was done when Gaza left. But the issue is, will the Palestinians recognize Israel as the nation state of the Jewish people and stop incentivizing people to engage in terrorism?
Alan
Until that
Dershowitz.
happens, there won't be a state.
Alan Dershowitz, good to have you here. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much.
Good to see you. All right, well, the latest controversy out of the Obama White House has policy experts touting a newfound closeness between President-elect Trump and Prime Minister Netanyahu. Mr. Trump tweeting earlier today, quote, "We cannot continue to let Israel be treated with such total disdain and disrespect. They used to have a great friend in the U.S., but not anymore. The beginning of the end was the horrible Iran deal, and now this, UN. Stay strong, Israel. January 20th is fast approaching." Here to debate whether a Trump presidency will produce a thaw in the newly chilled relations, senior advisor to the presidential transition team, Katrina Pearson, is here. Good to see you. And national security and foreign policy analyst Arash Aramesh. Good to have both of you.
Thank you, Sandra.
Arash, it does appear that things continue, that the relationship here, it has worsened. And Donald Trump is making big promises come January 20th when he gets there. But as you just heard Alan Dershowitz say, a lot of damage has already been done.
You know, America has no better friend in the region and in the world than the great state of Israel. And Israel has no better friend in the world than the United States of America. The American people and the Israelis share many, many, many mutual interests and mutual values. And Israel is the only true democracy in the Middle East. But, Sandra, I take very little comfort in the words of President-elect Donald Trump when he tries to sound pro-Israeli while he has alt-right, borderline anti-Semitic crowd surrounding him in the White House. Let me give you just one example. Mr. Alan Dershowitz was just on right before the election, and I have a lot of respect for Professor Dershowitz. He said that the reason that he would not want to see Trump win the election is because a Trump victory would hand victory to the alt-right movement. Steve Bannon, senior advisor to President Trump at the White House, quote, took his kids out of school because there were too many Jews in school. And then he apologized for it later.
Katrina, I want to get you in here.
I take very little comfort in that.
I'm sorry, Sandra. Really? We're talking about Steve Bannon now,
really.
when we have a serious conflict in the Middle East. Look, it's pretty obvious by now that President-elect Trump supports Israel, our greatest ally in the Middle East. And, you know, Professor Dershowitz just said he felt Obama was probably misleading him on this very topic. When the Obama administration has issued a 1-2 punch in betrayal from the Iran deal, which is funding terrorism right now, to this resolution. It's unconscionable to see this outgoing administration take these kinds of actions, or inaction for that matter, and abstaining from vetoing this ridiculous resolution. This is an insult to Americans. It's a slap in the face
let me
to the
press
peaceful
you on
transition
something
of
here,
power.
because he was challenged. Donald Trump was challenged on the campaign trail. I take you back to February 2016. Marco Rubio, Ted Cruz hit him on this hard. He was asked to pick sides in the conflict between Israel and Palestine. He said, quote, "Let me be sort of a neutral guy. I have friends of mine that are tremendous business people that are really good negotiators, and they say it's not doable." That stuck with him for a while.
Well, as a businessman, as the art of the deal, he does want to be in a position to help facilitate these things. But what we've seen now is this administration, the outgoing administration, has moved the United States from being that facilitator to actually being an arbitrator for the Palestinians. And that's not where we should be right now. And the fact that this is occurring less than a month before this transition of power is occurring, that's exactly why you see these exchanges on Twitter between the President-elect Trump and Benjamin Netanyahu. I think it's quite clear where the President-elect stands.
All right, and Arash, meanwhile,
Sandra,
all right, last word to you.
I can sit here and listen to Alan Dershowitz, with whom I disagree, but I take no lectures from Katrina Pearson. Katrina, you should not speak about foreign policy. You name just five.
Now this is about me.
I have a wager for. I will volunteer. Listen, I will volunteer for Trump. I will volunteer for Trump if you name 5 Israeli prime ministers. You don't know what you're talking about.
I don't know.
You name 5 Israeli prime ministers, and I will
let both of you
volunteer for
go.
the Trump.
Thanks for being here tonight. Still ahead, I really was losing IFB. I couldn't hear you guys. A Muslim woman and immigrant publicly explains why she voted for Donald Trump, and now she says she's coming under verbal assault from a former colleague and Georgetown University professor because of it. Azra Nomani is here to share her story. Plus, the Obama administration is preparing to announce retaliation against Russia over its cyber interference in U.S. elections. But is this move just intended to box President-elect Trump in? The debate. Breaking tonight, Fox News now confirming reports that the Obama administration is going to formally retaliate against Russia for cyber interference in the U.S. election at some point tomorrow. Critics raising concerns about the timing and purpose of Mr. Obama's actions, wondering if he is attempting to box in President-elect Trump. White House correspondent Kevin Corke reports from Hawaii. Kevin?
Sandra, good evening. In simple terms, it's a parting shot at Putin. As sources tell Fox News, the latest round of sanctions against the Russians could come as soon as Thursday. As you all have heard on a number of occasions, President Obama places the blame for the so-called cyber hacking and meddling during the run-up to the U.S. election squarely on the shoulders of Russian President Vladimir Putin. At his year-end press conference, Mr. Obama called on lawmakers from both sides of the political spectrum to take up the fight.
That should be a bipartisan issue. That shouldn't be a partisan issue. And my hope is that the president-elect is going to similarly be concerned with making sure that we don't have potential foreign influence in our election process. I don't think any American wants that. That shouldn't be a source of an argument.
While there's little argument on Capitol Hill about whether or not the Russians should face some sort of consequence for interference during the run-up to the election, there is, however, Sandra, strong disagreement over whether or not this administration should be the one to mete out justice.
The bottom line is you need to hit Russia in a sustained fashion. So if Obama tries to do something going out the door that's not sustained, then you send the wrong signal. Here's what I would prefer. Let the new Congress and the new president deal with Russia, pass new sanctions much tougher than the ones we already have.
Experts add, Sandra, that by slapping Moscow with sanctions on his way out the door, what President Obama has really done is paint Donald Trump into a bit of a corner, forcing him to either uphold the new penalties or be seen as a Putin puppet for backing away from them. A so-called political poison pill is how one expert described it. Another said it's sort of like Sherman burning down Atlanta on his way out of town. By any description, it should be a very tough start for Mr. Trump, thanks in part to what's left behind by Mr. Obama. Sandra?
All right, Kevin, thank you. Joining us now, Representative Sean Duffy, who was one of the first members of Congress to support Donald Trump. And Matt Bennett is the co-founder of Third Way and the former deputy assistant to President Clinton. Matt, I'll start with you first. Do you agree with President Obama's decision here to retaliate against Russia?
Hey, Senator, I absolutely do agree with it. As he points out, you simply cannot stand by while a hostile foreign power tries to meddle in our elections. We have got to retaliate because the only thing that Vladimir Putin and strong men like him understand is force. And we have plenty of force to use when it comes to cyber warfare. And I think if they're going to use it against us, we need to retaliate. He's right to do it.
And you think we should respond, Congressman?
Well, first off, all of us think we should respond. And you just had Lindsey Graham on. Republicans think if there was foul play, we should engage with Russia. This is not, though, about putting Barack Obama in a box or actually responding to Russia. Barack Obama has been weak with Russia. Look at the Russian reset, Crimea, Syria, Ukraine. This is about Barack Obama trying to find a scapegoat for his election losses. He's blamed Fox News. Now he wants to blame Russia. And so 8 years he's been weak on Russia. So the last 24 days of his presidency, he's now going to get a backbone and try to push back with sanctions that he can't even implement because he's going to be out of office. This is foolish, doesn't make any sense. Let the new Congress come in. Let Donald Trump come in, and let's work together and deal with Russia as a new government.
I mean, what do you think of that, Matt? I mean, why do this now? Why not wait for the incoming administration to deal with this? We still don't really know what the actual details are. Again, something's supposed to come out tomorrow. We don't even know in what capacity or format. But until we see those details, you do wonder about the timing of this. There's only 3 weeks left of this administration.
Well, I don't wonder. There's 3 weeks left of this administration. I think it's taken too long as it is. I mean, we had several weeks ago all 17 American intelligence agencies come out together and say that it was clearly the Russians that were involved in hacking our elections and trying to impact the outcome of our election. So this is clearly the correct move for the president to take, and he is still president. We have one at a time in this country. And if you looked at the president-elect's comments today, they were totally incoherent. He said, I don't know, there's computers and there's speed. And he issued a statement that made no sense at all. So I have no faith that Donald Trump will do anything. And I think it's appropriate for the president to take action while he's still in office.
And is it fair to say, Congressman, that we need to look at this? We need to find out and learn from it so that this doesn't become a problem, a habitual problem, and doesn't happen again in the near future.
Sandra, absolutely. And that's why Republicans, myself included, have stepped forward and said we have to engage in an investigation and hold Russia accountable. I think the misconception here, though, is from the left-wing media and from Barack Obama is to say that this involvement from Russia, whether it was with the DNC or with Podesta's emails, had any real impact on the election results last November. You saw the American people come out and vote on jobs and the economy and the southern border and foreign policy. That's what drove them to the ballot box to vote for Donald Trump to make America great again. It was not anything that came out from the silly and foolish emails from the DNC. We didn't really care that the DNC was supporting Hillary Clinton over Bernie Sanders, or that there was internal turmoil in the Clinton campaign that we saw from the Podesta emails. So to think that we're going to drive a story that makes the American voter think that Russia actually influenced our election is, I think, is a misdirection. And again, let's get all the facts. Let's let the new Congress actually come up with sanctions that are appropriate for the actions that Russia took. I think what Obama's doing here, the last 3 weeks, as you mentioned, to try to impose sanctions that he actually can enforce because he's going to be out of office is foolish. Yeah. And again, he's been a weak president on Russia, and now get a backbone and be strong in the last 24 days.
And Matt, it makes you look at the transition process as a whole. And President Obama sat there with Donald Trump that day after the election and said he promised a smooth transition. It's hard to look at the timing of this and think that that's falling into the category of smooth. I've got to leave it there. Both of you, thanks for joining us tonight, Congressman.
All right, thanks, Sam.
Timing is everything. Live TV coming up. Actress Leah Remini inviting more heat from the Scientology community after the latest episode of her docu-series turned its focus to the FBI and reports of forced abortions. Those details ahead. Plus, after Muslim American Asra Nomani, penned a piece in the Washington Post about her support for Donald Trump, she claims she was the subject of unrelenting abuse from a former colleague. Asra joins us next.